Erin.
Hi, Amber.
We're back.
Sure are.
Yeah, so we're going to dive in right away just to introduce why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
We have been going through this process of these forums and still committed to dismantling racism and decolonizing. And the questions that are coming up now are, how do we do this? And so we have created a tool to help move us forward in that direction.
Yeah, how to embrace this work that's ahead of us, this, aspiration to be truly and radically inclusive. How, right? How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a tall order. It's going to take a lot of small habits built up over time to make it seem natural, I think, and for us to have confidence in it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly.
Okay, so I guess just to let everyone know that we've set it up this way today, that I'm going to ask questions. Erin, you're going to answer them so that we're as succinct as possible, and try to give as much information that might not come up in other areas, so that there's a little bit of a foundation here and how to move forward. Okay. So the first question is, what is this tool?
Okay, so what we have is something that is generic. So it doesn't matter what kind of form of inclusion your organization, congregation, group is looking to address. It's a tool that will lead you through a process that you can use to begin to understand how to go about understanding the lived experiences of others, understanding your organizational culture, and then moving into another way of being together that results in those people feeling more included and more safe in your space.
Mm-hmm. And we titled it something specifically for a reason. It's called Consciously Shifting Power, Biases, and Privilege, a tool for organizational culture shift.
Yeah.
Do you want to just dig into that a little bit and maybe explain what organizational culture is?
Yes, and that is a very important term, I guess, that we do need to delve into, because we think of culture sometimes as just ethnic culture, but organizational culture is specific to a group of people, and it's actually a set of shared values, beliefs, norms, principles, assumptions, all that sort of stuff that guide the behavior of people as members of that organization. And it influences like how we interact with one another. So that includes like how we speak, how we listen, how we make decisions, how we address conflict. It also guides how certain members are privileged over others. And remember that privilege isn't always something that is overtly given, but it could happen by virtue of how a person, with the body a person comes in as well. So this is something that's typically ignored in organizations, but it's included here in a more conscious way. And the context within which knowledge is created in the organization, the resistance that an organization might have towards new ideas or certain changes, right? So all of this goes into understanding our organizational culture. And so when we talk about shifting it, it refers to that intentional modification of those shared values, beliefs, norms, principles, and assumptions of the group to make room for the inclusion of other people's ways of being together, ideas, that sort of thing.
Okay, so we're trying to shift our culture. That's what we've agreed to do as a community. Right now, specifically dismantling racism, decolonizing, and that's where we're starting anyway for now.
Yeah.
And so how would we use this tool?
All right, so can we bring it up onto the screen, and I'll sort of walk us through. There's two kind of ways that I can imagine that you might begin to kind of segue into using this. One might be, if you see there on the left side, it says invite feedback. It's possible that your organizational culture may already have kind of set out an indication that you're willing to hear people's feedback about what it feels like for them to be a part of your congregation, your group, right? So it's possible some people may come forward and say, here, I want to offer you this. This is what's happening to me. This is my experiences. Another option, though, if you go to the very top, it says focus intentionally. And this means that you might actually choose to consciously look at different aspects of your culture. So say classism or inclusivity based on different abilities or race or family relationship structures or some other characteristic, right? And you might actually choose to focus and say, well, what is happening right now? Not what do we wish was happening, but what is actually happening within our congregation in that regard. And the guide that accompanies this, I've included a whole bunch of different questions that you might be able to ask yourself that would bring to your attention things that maybe you wouldn't see. So things like, how does power flow and move? What privileges are most and least represented in our organizations? In what ways might someone feel othered, excluded, marginalized, less safe in regards to whatever area of focus that you're bringing to your attention? So you would start there. Now, something that you'll notice about this graphic is that it's always bringing us back into the center. And so between every point that you see on this graphic, it says to affirm and manage personal discomfort that comes up. So this is a nod back to the responsibility covenant, where we say, hey, you know, it can be really challenging for us to have our privileges kind of pressed on or challenged, and that we want to be able to say to each other, this is tough work. I get that you're feeling how you're feeling. I get that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and I'm still going to manage my discomfort so that I can go through this cycle to learn and to understand more. So you might start then at the intentional focus, and then you check back in with yourself. The next thing we might want to do is inquire into our blind spots. So these are the things that exist, but may not be within our consciousness at this point, right? Something hasn't yet brought it to our attention, so we don't realize that it's there, that maybe it's a bias, maybe it's a practice or a way you do something that you've never considered, that from, that particular group's focus. So, whichever group is being oppressed or feeling excluded, from their perspective, that you realize, shoot, we never thought about that. You may end up having to deep dive into some learning in order to find out what some of those things are. It may not be that you're relying on members of your congregation to report to you, but just things that you begin to inquire into and discover. And then you go back into that center when you're doing that work, when you're inquiring into your blind spots, what's coming up for you, how are you managing that discomfort in such a way that you're not projecting it outwards to try to slow things down, or claiming something's moving too fast, it's too hard for you, or whatever, right? That can all be true. You can affirm it, but then, not using it as an excuse to end the process.
I feel like that is the real spiritual practice for me, is like continuing to check in with that part of myself internally, and to also maintain harmony somehow outwardly, and to do that with that acceptance work. I accept that this is difficult. I accept I'm not doing this perfectly, and I'm still, my goal is to maintain some sort of harmony and safety and well-being for others and myself at the same time. Yeah, it's a lot of checking in.
And to build on what you just said, so as we check in, right, we know that this is our intention as a movement, is to be radically inclusive, right?
Yes.
A part of managing that discomfort might be, what stories do identify with regarding my organizational culture that make it difficult for me to look at things with new eyes. Like, we're a progressive organization, we are involved, we're innovative, we're leaders in human rights, whatever it is that might get in the way of us actually identifying those things that we're not consciously aware of.
Yeah.
That becomes part of the work. And in the guide that accompanies this, we're including some questions that you can ask yourself while you're in that center spot of managing and acknowledging and affirming your own discomfort.
Okay, so like basically how we use this tool is we either decide that we're going to focus in on something, or we find a place in the circle where we're already at, and we move around the circle in this order, while in between each stage, continually checking in with ourselves to make sure that we are doing the work thoroughly, I guess, is the only
Yes.
way I can think of it right now. Okay.
Yep.
Are there
And I'm
any?
identifying those two spots where people might most likely start, which is either consciously starting it or because someone brings something up.
Oh, okay, I see that. Okay, thanks for that.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a question about, like, this is a pretty big document, and I know that the supporting document is also very thorough, but are there aspects, like important aspects of this tool that we should really pay attention to? And let me know when I can pull this down. But
Sure.
yeah.
I would say one key one is the releasing opinions and seeking perspectives. And a key thing about that is that perspective is what we each have based on our specific firsthand experience in the world, whereas opinions are the views and judgments we have about something, and they don't necessarily have to be based on any facts or experiences.
Right.
And so part of this process, right, is recognizing that sometimes we have really strong opinions about other people's experiences in our organization with little to no direct experience pertaining to their reality. And so part of this process is differentiating between those two and realizing that we need to release some of our opinions in order to make room for other people's perspectives. And that we can have, it's a whole bunch of people, say 50 people in a room, and those people can be so similar that only a few perspectives might be represented. So just because there's lots of people there doesn't mean you can see the issue from many different angles, right? If those people who have that positionality are not there actually speaking with you about it.
And that's what really adds the richness to our community, is a multitude of perspectives.
Well, it has the potential to, but like we've
Right.
identified, the aspirational goal of being truly inclusive hasn't yet translated into a large range of diversity within our congregations. So we do have that to note that it might be challenging when thinking about how do we be more inclusive when those folks aren't in our congregations yet. Perhaps because our culture is not one that, they would naturally gravitate towards. Right. I don't know, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that is one area that I would say is pretty important. Just to begin to do that teasing apart of opinions and perspectives. That's a really
good place, I think, to pay attention to, especially then. I mean, I can imagine this being a real strong point to go back and affirm and manage personal discomfort.
One of the other ones is affirming your willingness to deeply listen and act on what you hear, right? And the reason I think this is really important is doing this before. So often people are brought in under the pretense that something big and different is going to happen because they're going to come and share something vulnerable about their experience of inclusivity, right? Or lack thereof.
When you say people are brought in, can you just unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, so like just imagine, and we are going to, in the new year, have different sessions on different topics. The first one on February 2nd is going to be on being inclusive of people from different family structures or relationship structures. So say you get into your mind, well, shoot, we want to be more inclusive in this way. And then you say to some folks, well, I want you to come and tell us about your open relationship or your polyamorous relationship, or how, there's these two families living together under one roof, however it is, right? And we say to them, come and bare your soul to us. But we haven't done our own work to, first of all, discover if there's a willingness in us to be open to hearing what people have to say, and if there's the resources and capacity to do anything about it. So because what can happen is then people then share some aspect of their life, which then makes them more vulnerable to people's criticism, but then we don't actually do anything with it, or we don't do our job to protect, or we haven't got a plan in place that says, hey, if in your sharing people act this way or that, we have a plan to deal with that resistance, so you don't have to take that on. Right? On a different note, say the focus is on different abilities and disabilities inclusion, and you say to somebody who's say is hearing impaired or sight impaired, we really want to make sure we include you. but then you don't actually have a budget for whatever technologies would result in their inclusion. It's,
Right.
in my opinion, unfair to begin that process of, in a way, it's not to say it's a problem to begin a process, but it's a problem to begin a process claiming something different than you're actually able to deliver on. So, hey, we want you to tell us all about this. We want you to take your valuable time to inform us. And here is the resources we do or we do not have to give to this, right? And this means that doing your internal work so that you're fairly sure that within your organizational culture, there's going to be a broad receptivity to hearing what people have to say. That doesn't mean you get to control everybody. You still may have naysayers. You still may have people who are opinion flinging, using their opinions to silence others. But you want to have a plan for how you're going to create a sense of like listening and action before you use people's valuable time and increase their sense of vulnerability in that situation. So that one is very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we move around, then we talk about, then broadening and deepening perspectives. And in the guide, we give, again, some more questions and things you might ask. The other one that we want to talk about is, so you're deepening your understanding of someone's experience, but are you actually committing to believe people's experiences of oppression and exclusion? So, yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that we know through some of the dismantling racism work that there is in our movement at times an undertone of saying to people, you need to show me, prove it. So if racism is a thing in our congregations, show it to me, prove it to me, right? It's not good enough if it happened one time to one person in a congregation.
Yeah.
It's that you now have to be able to prove it across the country or something like that, right? That's a form of not believing. It's also a form of minimizing. So to draw a parallel here, it would be like if somebody was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted in our congregations, to say, well, I'm sorry that it happened to you, but you're just one person. It doesn't really matter unless you can show me that it's happening in all of our congregations. I'm not going to believe that it's that big of a deal, not big enough that I need to do anything to change my culture or my ways to deal with your reality. So when we give that example, you immediately went, right? Because it is a wake-up call that we realize that there's something really transformative that happens when we choose to believe that when someone is telling us something that goes against the grain of our culture, that it puts them in a position of being more vulnerable. They get a lot of backlash, a lot of sometimes unwanted attention because of that. So it is quite unlikely, not impossible, but quite unlikely that somebody will make something up that then attracts them a lot of negativity.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than being told it's not that bad. That's like one example of that minimizing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that happens in our cultures lots. Think about what we're going through with racism, that, it's not that big of a deal. Let's just put it off a little bit more. But people of color, we really want you to come and be a part of our culture, but we don't want to change necessarily, but we want you to come and be a part of something.
Yeah.
And we kind of believe you when you say that you're having a hard time, but like, surely it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to work on that kind of an attitude before we go into having these sort of conversations.
Yeah.
Can I draw attention to two other kind of really important things?
Yes. And then I have another question for you.
Oh, okay, cool. So there's a difference between responding relationally and responding by dismantling things systemically. So when we talk about relationally, we are looking at the human beings in our midst who are sharing with us whatever it is that they're sharing about their lived experience, right? So we want to think about a couple of things. One is that they've had a whole life before they came and had whatever experience they've had with you. And so then to realize that you exist in their life on a continuum, right? It's not, you don't get to be a separate thing, to be a unit, and now that's compartmentalized out. You're dealing with a person who has a complete whole life. And so when this is coming up, it's about dealing with what resources and supports do you need? How do we make amends if that's appropriate? What are we doing to address this on a personal level and a human level? And then when we talk about systemically, we're looking at things with the understanding that there is a current of power and privilege, right? Certain people's experiences and comfort are privileged in our organizations. And that, by the way, is if you are in your own organization and you're rarely uncomfortable. That you're in a place that's been set up to kind of suit you. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about dismantling it and addressing the current, it's kind of like if the difference between kayaking, I learned to kayak in a swimming pool where there was no currents, right? Compared to then when I went into the river and there was a current.
Yeah.
When there was a current and they said, hey, now I want you to get across the river, I knew then I had to factor that in. If I didn't, I was going to be way down the river. So that means like we're dismantling barriers. The systemic things means kind of like looking at that current and going, what's already going on here? And how do I head into that current in such a way that I'm factoring it in, I'm not ignoring it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are two different parts of this process that you cannot, I think that, you cannot do one without the other.
Right.
And do service to this process.
Well, and they feed each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah,
very
it's
much.
kind of that micro macro experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You said you had a question for me?
Oh, yeah. Are those the two that you wanted to bring up?
There's two, and I guess there would be one more that I want to make sure I mentioned before. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah.
Okay. So ensuring protection. So now, so say we've gone through identifying some of the barriers we want to dismantle, and then we've thought about, okay, we're going to co-create these opportunities to navigate this current, right? We're going to try to do things differently. While we're doing that, while we're figuring it out, while we're educating our members, while we're dealing with our own discomfort, how are we ensuring protection for people experiencing oppression and exclusion?
Yeah.
So that they're not taking the brunt of this. So an example would be in our forums, we have a BIPOC caucus, which means that people who are wanting to, people of color can bypass us and listening to our processing and our resistance and our everything, right? It cannot just be about them witnessing us, but having their own protection. So that's an example of ensuring protection, but for every particular thing, we want to make sure that we're looking at that.
Yeah, and that would be embedded into everything that we do.
Yeah, and so it's not though that you're protecting people to the point that they're not involved. So you still want to have inviting feedback, you want to have people with lived experience directing and guiding, but not taking on the brunt of the workload associated.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to, invite continual and ongoing feedback. How are we doing? Ideally, you're not putting yourself in a position where someone has to break down the walls of the fortress in order to get to that inner circle to say, hey, it's not working. What you're trying isn't resulting in the change you were seeking, right? We want to be able to engage in frequent ongoing interactions with people about, how is this working out? And then from that, the last kind of stage in the cycle would be to identify those best practices.
And I think all of this, what it does, and when it's done in small ways over time, is build trust between people, because that feedback loop that and the checking in and being in tuned and committing and protect, like all of these things to me are deposits into relationships, building trust. And if people don't trust the container, they're not going to want to step into it. And right. You can't build that quickly. It has to be built, to me, in very small, meaningful, consistent ways over and over and over again. Yeah.
So in this way, it could be used with the congregational covenanting process
Mhm.
as a tool that says, well, what do we do when things don't go the way that we wanted them to go? If this is a tool that helps to build that trust back.
Yes.
And if you do it actively, like proactively,
Yeah.
then you're showing members of the congregation that there is an aliveness, there's an organicness, and that when someone in the group has a need or has an experience, that it doesn't have to be something where they, there has to then be these, like a big production, a big war about it. It can be
Yeah.
like, oh no, we've got this. We know how we can approach this together.
Yeah, and I think when people like, let's say it's with dismantling racism, when it's BIPOC people seeing that we're doing it, that's the feedback that there's trustworthy action happening.
Mhm.
They can trust the commitment. Yeah.
And trust the process to
And the process.
understand that,
Yeah.
if you're successful in addressing this, say with racism, then there might be increased trust that you might be able to deal with it with classism.
Mhm.
Right? And then by the time you move on to your third or your fourth thing, people are less afraid of that because there's actual practices in place that do a few things. One is help us move through that wheel, and then the other is in a pastoral care way, helping us when we're dealing with our discomfort, because it really can be unpleasant
Yeah.
and feel unsafe
And embarrassing and all that stuff.
yeah, and so when we
Yeah.
can come to a place where we've been in different spots of that cycle, say we might be the ones coming forward and saying, I'm not feeling included, right? Or we might be part of that group that's learning together, or we might be the one that's feeling really uncomfortable. When you've had, a turn in all of those different spots, I think it's easier to feel empathy for the other in whatever situation
Right.
it is that you're in, right?
And when we enter in thinking that this exists and it doesn't, then it's a betrayal.
Yeah, can be. Yeah. And
No.
we've identified through conversations with UUs over the last year and a half or two,
Yeah.
is that sometimes when we create covenants without actual plans for what do we do when it doesn't work out the ideal way,
Yeah.
it can feel like a betrayal because the lack of understanding of what next
Yeah.
kind of hijacks people staying in good and strong relations with one another. Yeah, so I know that Joan and Linda, CSC staff, are adamantly trying to encourage people to make sure that the covenanting process is up to date, it's current, it's alive, right? And they can support that to make sure that all of these things are considered. And we're hoping that this tool is just another thing, like the responsibility covenants that you can use to figure out, ways forward.
Okay, so well, because you mentioned that the responsibility covenant, I'm just going to say now that this tool, just like the responsibility covenant, has a guide that goes with it. So if you're watching this, keep an eye out for that. There will be a link in the document for you to go to, and also the responsibility covenant, so that they can work kind of hand in hand. And if you want to learn more, we're always here to work with you through this process. So I'm just going to say that now because it's come up. And I have two more questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. The first question is the shape of this graphic. There's like a lot of movement going on. It seems like it's not, it's like a flow chart, but it's I don't know, it seems like it's ever moving, and I just wanted to know about that.
Yes, so that is for sure intentional.
Yes.
So the idea that everything in life is cyclical, right? That we can move with the cycles, but then also that when we are engaging in organic culture, right, we should be always renewed. So it looks as though this is just, going in this way, but we want you to think about it as like a spiral moving. So to be more explicit, what you identify one day as best practices, as you learn more and grow more and expand more, not just in our opinions, but in our perspectives and understanding the world through many people's lenses, you might go, oh, I think we have a new understanding of what and how we might want to be more inclusive. So that is why it shows that movement, as well as that inward outward focus. So always coming back to consciously being aware of what's going on inside us and how our resistance is attempting to make something that is a little bit uncomfortable be less uncomfortable for us, right? So we do want to have that focus on ourselves, but then also as individuals, and then also collective. So there's that in and out happening there as well.
Yeah, it's very relational. It seems like we're like moving in and out of all different types of relationships with ourselves, with the organization, with the people that we engage with on a one-to-one level. And we're just kind of trying to move around this goal, I guess, together. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. And I think this question might have been answered, but I'm going to ask it again because it's written down. And the question is, what did we have in mind when we created this tool?
Well, let's be very specific about that. So inclusivity is our focus, radical inclusivity for the year and the events that we're hosting. So as we finish up the forums, which are focused on inclusion and race, we will be moving into 3 more sessions, one on inclusivity and family relationship structures, the other one to do with class, and then the third one to do with abilities and disabilities. So this tool, and why we're introducing it now, is so that it can be something that we use as we move ahead, so that we have something ready to go as people look at each of these different topics with us.
Yeah, I think it's going to be when we get to a point where this becomes just the example of how we do things, the tool will be more of an archive and more of a lived experience, a lived practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and we will continue even with this document as we have with the responsibility covenant guide.
Yes.
They are a live document, so as we learn more, we modify things, and it becomes sort of our collective treasure chest of of resource that we can use to move forward with all of this.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to seeing you again and seeing everyone again as we work through this. I continue to see people showing up and working through things, and doing everyone's best to just stay in community with each other. So here we go.
Yeah, I second that. It is a joy to work with congregations and groups and individuals. So we encourage you to interact with us and engage with us. We'd love to do that.
Great.
All right.